right, you joyfully miserable accursed. Let's get this pod underway. I'm David Herle with Jordan Leichnitz, Scott Reid, and back after a 1-week absence at the Stampede, Kory Teneycke. And it's on that subject that I bring you, and you know, Scott, this is interesting because you were talking about feedback. We get to the pod. It's on that subject I bring you this accurate YouTube comment from Jonkers Lake 7125.
Oh.
Jonkers Lake 7125 says, this potty always has something to say, humor optional. But today it lacked for Kory's absence. No disrespect to Scott or Jordan. It would equally lack if either were missing. But this episode highlighted how important and impressive the dynamic of the three commentators truly is here. So Jonkers Lake 7125, I have two things to say to you. One of which is to say I thank you for your polite way of saying that last week's episode was a steaming pile of shit. But second of all, what the fuck's with the three? Like, am I of no value here? Like, I don't even exist in your world, Jonkers Lake 7125. Do I have to be here or not?
David,
I'm optional.
You're just so evidently neutral. That's what's going on.
Don't you feel bad, Big Dave. It takes 4 to have a euchre party. You're valued.
All right. Let's get to today. The fall budget's going to be about fiscal reconciliation, it seems. During the campaign, Prime Minister Carney said if elected, he would spend less so Canada can invest more. Now he's asked Cabinet to find billions of dollars of savings by making, quotes, ambitious cuts to operational spending. We'll talk about that. Our cursed clipping today is related. It comes from Verity Stevenson at CBC News. Pierre Poilievre told Catherine Cullen that he lost his Carleton riding after 20 years because he was honest about wanting to cut public service jobs. And then from September to March, a crawling 7-month campaign to see who gets to lead the NDP back from the wilderness. We'll break a bit of that down. And finally, Gordon Pinsent really is eternal. He's been honored with a gorgeous new bronze statue just unveiled in his hometown of Grand Falls, Windsor, Newfoundland. And we'll continue to honor him every week here as he brings us our Hey Yous. So, hey, guys, how are you? Team, good to see you.
So good.
Good to be back.
Kory, give us a Stampede anecdote.
Yeah.
What's a good anecdote? I don't know. It's the Stampede. It's like everybody goes to the same receptions, and it's you see all the same people you know in Toronto and Ottawa as they take turns going to each other's party. And barely an Albertan is Matt, I would say. I don't know. The best part of the trip for me, I went and hung out with my buddy Nate, who lives out there. That has absolutely nothing to do with politics, and I welcomed an afternoon reprieve from the circuit of receptions as just described. So, it was look.
Do you do any rodeoing? Do you go to the rodeo?
I mean,
I've been to the rodeo a number of times. I didn't go to
like, do you do quarters
this time
or any of those?
Yeah.
Like,
I'm more interested. I want to see some outfit photos, Kory. Like, we need visuals, please.
Oh,
you say it's like Toronto, but like you have a pistol. So
with cowboy cosplay, like it's a giant session of cowboy LARPing, and no, I think I was doing okay.
LinkedIn is full of more people who should not be dressed that way during Stampede Week. Let me just tell you, LinkedIn people who think that you look good in your jeans and your hat, you don't.
Look at David crushing the joy. Like,
absolutely.
Jesus Christ.
I got a lot of negative feedback about the cowboy cosplay stuff last week, and being told that I didn't know anything and so on and so forth, because I'm from Ontario, and not to run it down, and I was running down the West, and I was like, I'm running down the West. I'm running down the phonies who pretend to be from the West.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I got all the cowboy outfits, and I did grow up on a farm, but you didn't wear a cowboy hat unless you had cattle. And growing up, a ball cap was the true prairie farmer wear. But anyway.
All right. So listen, we talked about this. I had the Chiefs on last week, the former Chiefs of Staff.
Chiefs.
And Brian Topp and Tim Murphy and
it was good.
Ian Brody.
Yeah, it
was good. So we ended up talking about a fair bit about how this budget reconciliation stuff is going to go down. And there are so many massive spending commitments out there, seemingly, um, in that the defense commitments are astonishing in and of themselves, but be difficult to manage in and of themselves. It seems like there's going to be government spending involved in these national projects going forward. Whole swaths, large swaths of federal spending territory have been taken off the table for cuts, transfers to people, transfers to provinces. Leaves very dramatic cuts being focused on a relatively small area of government spending, a lot of which will be manpower, but presumably which will be government operations. Now, the question is, how much do you think, and I'll start with you, Kory, that he needs to worry about the balanced budget track, given all the other things he has that the government has going on? I would hypothesize that among the things that people are looking for out of this government, that would be among the lower order initiatives right now.
I would agree with that, but I would also agree they absolutely have to reprofile a hell of a lot of spending there if they're going to do the other things they're talking about. I'm not sure how much the general population of Canada, and actually I'll posit the answer to this too, how much people are aware of how much government grew over the Trudeau years. But the size of the public service is up like 44%. Like, it's a shocking number for that period of time. And like, I get why part of that happened during the pandemic, all these new programs, and you added all these people. But at the end of that, they didn't get rid of anybody. And like, CERB isn't around anymore. It hasn't been around for a long time. Like, how many people did you hire for that, and why are they still there? Like,
Right.
you saw this in a bunch of other industries. The tech industry, doubled in size at the beginning of the pandemic because everyone thought people were going to stop going to Walmart forever, and e-commerce was going to take over retail shopping, and that didn't happen. And what did they do? They all shrank back to the size they were before. Like, it's not like it's that didn't happen other places, but what didn't happen in Ottawa is the adjustment afterwards. And I think that you can get rid of a lot of people in the jobs there are currently to reprofile that money for some of the things they're talking about doing. And some of those things will be jobs in government but they might be in completely unrelated areas. If you were dishing out CERB checks in a cube farm somewhere on Wellington Street, it doesn't mean that you're going to become a CBSA border agent without a little retraining, I would hope. But the needs are going to be different. The things that the government is needing to focus on are going to be different, and government can't just get bigger in one direction forever and nobody have their job changed. And like, that is a recipe to get back into the debt crisis that we found ourselves in the 1990s. And I thought Ian Brody in particular articulated the risk that is looming out there in the bond market. If the U.S. continues to spend the way they are, the ability to access capital in bond markets could be severely reduced for everybody else. And I worry that we don't have a looming debt crisis here, and that despite the necessity to spend money on some of the things we're talking about, or that the government's talking about, those things are real, but unless you stop spending in some other areas, I think you're going to have a lot of trouble. I don't think anyone has an appetite for getting rid of long-standing entitlement programs. So there's a lot of spending that's off the table as you look at what you're going to adjust. But there are other things that haven't been around for a long time, and I'm not sure the bang for the buck is there. I think some of the stuff that the government did around creating new entitlement programs, which we've talked about a bunch of times, whether it's around dental or whether it's around the much talked about and never existed $10 a day daycare, like things like that, I think are are different level of priority and have a different level of acceptance in the marketplace or, by voters. So, there's some tough choices to be made. And there were tough choices in the 90s when you guys were working on that. But, you got to make them or we're going to bankrupt ourselves. So I don't think anyone is looking for a balanced budget per se, but that doesn't mean that the fiscal responsibility is nowhere on the spectrum of issues for people. It may not be today, but it may find its way onto the agenda very quickly if we end up in a bit of a debt crisis.
So, a question. Can something display qualities of sincerity and insincerity at the same time? Contradiction, duplicitousness, and a double standard at the very heart of it. The following story says that it can. I've been talking here about how our presenting sponsor TELUS's competition have been trying to restrict TELUS from offering wholesale fiber internet services in Ontario and Quebec, going so far as to formally petition Cabinet to overturn a thoroughly reviewed CRTC decision that had allowed it, based on proven consumer benefits. Last week I told you about Cogeco. This week it's Bell. Now get this. Post the CRTC decision, Bell has been aggressively trying to stop other providers from getting wholesale access to their fiber networks in Canada, actively lobbying against it, threatening to hold back investment if they don't get their way. Their very loud argument? Allowing wholesale access undermines the economics, the whole business case for fiber deployment. Yet, just 8 short months ago, Bell publicly announced a $5 billion deal to acquire a company called Ziply Fiber, an internet provider in Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Montana. Ziply's business model explicitly includes the wholesaling of fiber services. Ding, 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 double standard alert. If Bell doesn't believe in the economics of wholesale fiber access, why did they just spend $5 billion big ones in the US to acquire a company that actively promotes, packages, and profits from wholesaling fiber services? And friends, it's here I take you back to the question I asked at the top of this piece. Can something be sincere and insincere at the same time? Bell has been frighteningly sincere in its ongoing efforts to prevent real competition here in Canada, but blatantly insincere about why they're doing it. You can't profess disbelief in the wholesale fiber business case when you've just bought one for $5 billion in another country yet. Cabinet, are you listening? I'll underline how Canadian customers stand to lose from all of this next week. One of the differences with the 90s, Jordan, is that the government doesn't have a majority.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of a big difference. I was talking to a bunch of smart people who are veterans of the 90s on the weekend about this issue. And they were saying, well, especially given the defense commitments, you got to put a couple of points back up on the GST to get some money. And I'm telling you that the data that I'm looking at in public opinion in terms of how stretched people feel about their own personal finances, I can't think of anything that would bring this honeymoon with the Carney government to a crashing halt faster than adding 2 points onto the GST.
Yeah, I mean, this is fascinating because I think here Carney is solving for a problem that is not top of mind in voters' list of concerns, which is just what you raised with Kory. The point is, we're not in a debt crisis like we were in the 1990s, but the cuts that Carney is talking about would make Harper blush, and in fact are far closer to what you saw in the 90s than what you saw under Harper. And it just doesn't match the scale of concern that people have about public spending right now. And we can debate whether or not that's a factual thing. But the reality is that that's not where voters' minds are at. And I think to go to your point, David, the government has not just a spending issue maybe, but they've also got a revenue problem, right? So what is the first thing that Carney did when he came in? Well, he cut the capital gains tax increase. Then he proceeded to cut personal income taxes. He's just cut the digital services tax. We can also presume that with the increase in defense spending that he's talking about, that presumably Department of National Defense is going to be exempt from these cuts. if you're exempting transfer payments. So you're working with a smaller and smaller pool where you have to make a larger and larger proportion of cuts, which greatly increases the chances, by the way, that these fucking cuts are going to be felt in service delivery for people in a way that is politically unpalatable. And I thought this was a really important point when you guys had the discussion with the chiefs that was made, is that all across the board, all of this program spending, each and every one of these programs has a political constituency. So there is a cost to doing this kind of cutting. And I think the other thing that it's really important to recognize here is the way that these cuts are going to be pushed through ahead of the fall budget. So Carney's effectively given each department 2 months to deliver these savings. Okay. So this is not like a line by line review. This is really like you've got 2 months to figure out what you're going to serve up here in order to meet this target. And that is like a far more Doge-like approach in terms of just going in and needing to meet a certain target of cut rather than something more surgical, which I actually think carries a lot more political risk to it, because in there you may well end up be putting things on the chopping block that are politically dangerous for you as a government rather than a process that takes a little bit longer. And look, I mean, to be clear, I hate this. I think this is just the type of thing, also, by the way, that a lot of the progressive voters who moved into the Liberal camp to block Poilievre are going to hate as this rolls out. I think that this will become very unpalatable politically to that segment of voters over time, especially as the trade-offs become clear. Like, we are really headed to a pinch point in this budget because of the massive increase in spending that Carney is putting forward, combined with these cuts. Right now, there is no pushback against this because the trade-offs aren't evident, but these are going to become evident in the budget, and there is going to be a political downside to that. And the thing that I worry about, so, we cover the gamut here. So Kory's concerned about the potential of a debt crisis. I'm concerned with what happens if unemployment continues to rise, right? What happens if we don't get a good deal on the tariff front? We get something that bakes in a certain level of tariffs. We ride into the fall with rising unemployment. Well, at the same time, are you going to cut government capacity in that situation? What is that result going to be for Canadians? So I think that there's a whole lot here that remains to be seen about what the politics of this are. But what we see on the table right now, I don't think it really looks appealing for the scope and scale of cuts that Carney is talking about. So I think it could potentially be a rough ride for them, particularly as I don't think that they really did a good job of preconditioning for this level and intensity of cuts during the campaign. There was discussion about capping the public service, but that is not what we are talking about here. The way this is going to roll out is going to require substantial job cuts, and that will also mean substantial cuts and reductions in services that Canadians rely on. So there's a trade-off there for sure for the Carney government.
Not necessarily net, though, Jordan. Like, the government's talking about growing in some areas, and there are other areas where it's going to have to shrink. I'm not sure you see a huge net change in the number of people who draw a paycheck from the federal government. Like, if you add, 20 or 30,000 people to the armed forces, you got to find 20 or 30,000 people to get rid of someplace else net. And does anyone feel like government services have improved by 44% over the course of the Trudeau era? Of course they don't.
I want to be really clear. I don't think there's anybody, and by the way, not even the public sector unions, who are saying that no changes are necessary, right? So there is absolutely an acknowledgement that there has been big growth in the public service, and there could be shifts coming from that. But it is a fallacy to think that you can make all of these cuts through consultants, for example, or in a way that doesn't impact service delivery. That is not how this is going to work, in particular, exactly because of what you're talking about, Kory. If you hire 20,000 people in the military, and then you take away 20,000 people in the public service, that's 20,000 people less who are doing some form of service delivery, right? So there is a trade-off there. And I think we have to see how that plays out.
It's the classic political science trade-off, Scott, that you learn about the first thing, guns versus butter. Right?
Yeah.
It's guns versus butter. All governments face it.
Yeah, they sure do. And you're going to face it big time here, maybe. I think there's a couple of things I would say. By the way, I haven't listened to the Chiefs yet, so I apologize if I'm saying something that someone else did or I'm treading on territory. But one quick note I want to make about something you said, Jordan, is when you said, well, look, these cuts are going to come and they've got 2 months and it's not a program review. It's just an across the board Doge thing. I would just say, that's not how I read it. It may result in that. But the way I read it was, you have 2 months, deputy ministers, to perform surgery, or we're coming in with a bone saw and doing it for you. So I saw it as, you give us your list, you show us your savings, we'll determine whether they're real. And those of you, by the way, who fail that test will find that your career ends up, at the bottom of the parking garage, and we're gonna be forced to come in. So I'm not sure exactly how all that process unfolds. That being said, I grant everything everyone has said. There's a lot of political jeopardy in this. The principle, though, isn't, you can look at the tiered choice of priorities that Canadians tell you in one of your surveys, David, and you can then take your marching orders from that. People want their cake and eat it too. They want Mark Carney to say that he is concerned with the level of deficits and public spending, and he is determined to rein in spending and to be sensible, even as they will not reward you for a sincere effort to balance the budget. Because literally people will go, well, fuck, man, I wasn't for all that, right? So that is always the unique challenge. Right now, he's in a period of time where he gets to have his cake and eat it too. He can talk about it, but he doesn't have to suffer the consequences. I think there's a trap here, which we haven't talked about yet, or at least we haven't on this pod, and that is this definition that he is going to create between capital and operating. We don't know what operating is. We don't know what his definition of operating is. Like, is operating how much the departments pay for electricity and firewood, or is it bigger than that? Is it all the or do we just mean your A base as a department if you're not one of the blessed few, such as defense? Or I said maybe where, we're going to actually dump some new money in, or certainly housing, or whatever happens with Build Canada Homes and so on and so forth. So, and I think here's the political risk that I think.
Am I deaf, or is there not a word about housing being uttered by this government right now? Or am I deaf?
Bingo.
We'll have to, it's interesting, right? So you haven't heard much about it. So what are they going to do on that front? But here's the question in my mind politically is, I do think there's a risk. Carney has told us he's going to move the goalposts, and I think that's politically risky. Like when he comes forward and he says, listen, good news, everybody. Turns out I have balanced the budget. I've balanced the operating budget as I've defined it. In 3 years, the budget's going to be balanced, and we fulfilled it. So I've given you, and I think that invites the whole world to say, hold the phone, man. What you're defining as capital versus what you're defining as operating. And then that actually gives the Conservatives room to really lunch on them. And it gives the Conservatives room to say, we're not maniacs suggesting that the budget be balanced in 2 years. We're just calling bullshit on what you're doing here. So I think when he gets to that point, when they start to lay out the new tables, and here's what our new structures are, these are our new, here's the capital budget, here's the operating budget, this is how they reconcile. I think that's going to be very politically risky, because it invites everybody from the left and the right and the economists and politicians even to say, well, hang on a second, this is sorcery, this is a sleight of hand show. And I think they got to be very, very careful about that. It would be less risky almost to sort of say, listen, we're going through these cuts, we're taking it as we can. We'll have to see what happens with Trump, and not attempt to say, great news, I've made the operating budget balance, because people go, well, what's that? This is nonsense. So I think there's a lot of political risk there.
Well, yeah. The conundrum, though, for the Conservatives is the same on this as it is on so many issues right now. Carney is essentially executing on their platform.
Totally.
I think you heard it with Brody. You've heard it from many other commentators out there in media and elsewhere. The changes that they're talking about making with the Canadian Armed Forces, extremely popular with Conservatives. Conservatives have been banging their fists on the table for the entire Liberal administration, and many of them during the Harper years too, to take defense spending more seriously and to do more in that area. There's agreement on going after. Well, are you disputing
Yes,
the
I am fact
conservatives?
checking you.
Yeah,
No,
the
defense
conservatives
spending
want
was
to spend more
lowest.
on.
No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. We have to bring a fact in here. It was lower under Harper than it was under the Liberals. And by the way, even Poilievre himself was not committing to 2% until very recently.
That's not contradicting my point. I'm talking about what conservatives, commentators out there have been asking for.
Spiritually.
Well, I think it's accurate. There's been a lot of concern for a long time that Canada is not doing as much with the military as it should, and I think that I'm not disputing the point.
And when you only get a tiny 9-year window to do something about it, who can blame you for not acting?
Well, you saw
the guy was actually listen. You two people are so mean to Kory.
I know.
Was actually criticizing the Harper government. He was actually saying that conservatives thought Harper should have spent more money on defense. Is that not your point, Kory?
I'm just trying to blow sand up his ass.
That is in fact my point. That is in fact my point. So I don't know what we're fact checking here, but. I think
you, Kory.
I think conservatives are, the larger point here, and we can extend it to trying to rein in spending in the federal government. I think conservatives will be happy to see some of that 44% of increase in the size of the public service get trimmed back. And to have it go towards things that are long-standing priorities for conservative voters. That's if we're talking about why I don't think there's going to be a deluge of criticism or maybe a huge opportunity for the conservatives on this, it's because they're going to be very cross-pressured. Like, I think both sides of that are, generally speaking, supported by conservative voters. And this is the challenge, I think, for Poilievre and the conservatives right now and I guess we'll probably get into this when we talk about the clipping today, but to preview it a little bit, there's a lack of a coherent message and critique of the Carney government, and I think you're seeing them trying to feel their way around to develop one, but it's hard to do. It was a lot easier when you had a very left-wing version of the Liberal Party with Trudeau that was all about, feelings and values and soft, fuzzy hugs for everybody, as opposed to what's being talked about now, which is an increased, emphasis on the economy, greater spending on military and defense and border security, reining in the size of the public service, more free trade with provinces, building large resource projects to access new markets and develop our resources more appropriately. Like, what does that sound like? Does that sound like the Liberals of the Trudeau era? Does that sound like a fourth term of Harper? And I think that is the challenge that the Conservatives have right now, and that is also the opportunity I think the Liberals have in the sense that it is in this way very analogous to what went on in the 1990s. Yes, the Reform Party was attacking the Liberal government of Chrétien and Martin as they were going through the cut program that they were doing, but they were kind of attacking from the right, saying, you're not doing enough fast enough. And they created a huge amount of political cover, I think, for Paul Martin and Jean Chrétien as a result. At the end of the day, I think it's good policy to do all of these things. It's just the politics for the opposition party, when it's a conservative party and the Liberals are implementing that agenda, has proven in the past and seems to be proving today to be much more challenging.
Okay, so apropos of absolutely nothing at all, but the fact that it's July, here from the folks at CN who sponsor this pod is the railroad version of some beach reading. Just some interesting stuff. Railways have places called hump yards. Want to know what a hump yard is? A hump yard uses gravity to sort rail cars. Gravity is a pretty powerful tool. An arriving train is pushed over an artificial hill, the hump. Then its cars are decoupled and allowed to coast down onto one of several tracks, controlled precisely into place by a braking system. It saves tons of work. Now you know. It's especially effective on hump day. That was a joke. I was joking. Okay, so bridges. Canada has a lot of rivers and canyons and gorges, so CN has a lot of bridges. 7,250 bridges. That's 315 kilometers of bridging, or 195 miles. That's like Kingston to Toronto, all on bridges, or Calgary to Edmonton. A staggering amount of spans and steel beams and track. And tunnels. CN has tunnels, more than 80 of them, and that's only counting the ones that are more than 135 feet long. Some are underwater. Some pass through mountains. Because, sometimes the best way around obstacles is right through them. And CN has its own police force. They're there to keep trains and the public safe, usually meaning apart. Over the decades, 350 CN officers have been awarded medals of distinction by the Governor General. I could go on. Rolling refrigerator cars, specially decorated locomotives, fire cars operating out of the wilderness by courageous CN firefighting teams. This might be the silly season, but CN railroaders are doing the serious work. Every day, count on it. Scott, let me pick it up with you here, which is Kory's talking about, and we were talking about in the Chiefs, the comparison with 95.
Yeah.
And there are some obvious comparisons to 95, but one big difference is that in 1995, within 3 years, the government eliminated the deficit and showed steady progress toward eliminating it every one of those years. And that helped sustain political support for the enterprise because it was evidently, provably being successful at its job. There are no cuts, incredibly, that I can see in the box that Carney has left that will balance the federal budget. And they don't have revenue available to them. So they're not going to balance the budget. They're going to manage the federal budget, the federal deficit, not going to balance it. And so they're not going to have that big moment. They're not even going to have a progress moment. They're just going to have the morass, as I describe it, of cuts and deficits, which is a different political proposition altogether.
Well, two things about that.
More like the Mulroney situation than the Chrétien-Martin situation.
Right. Exactly. I agree with that, but I think it could be worse because I go back to my point. Right. That's a bad situation that you just described. The worst situation is where you attempt to manufacture progress and then people can test it. And you say, listen, because we've changed the terms, we're actually moving toward success. Now, can he persuade the country and kind of whatever the opinion leaders to accept this distinction and point to the UK and see it's used there or whatever have you? I'm unconvinced. And so I actually think that it may be even worse because you're going to tell people something they wish to intuitively reject. And so whenever you're in the business of telling people something they don't believe, you're in a politically dangerous spot. The other thing, though, that works for them, I think, is one challenge. Like, again, I don't want to preview what we're going to say when we come to the Poilievre clipping, but Poilievre's position does fundamentally appear to be, we'll do that too. We'll just do more of it, and we'll do it with a cruel smile, right? Like, and so one thing in 95 that was, I think, important, and maybe people think this is just window dressing and sophistry. Certainly on the left, people didn't buy it. Even some people on the left in our own caucus at the time, David, didn't buy it, right? But the argument and motivation was so critical, right? One, it was to take on and tackle this fundamental external threat, which was we had to get our budget under balance. Otherwise, we were going to lose control over our choices. But the corollary to that was, yes, I'm going to cut 40,000 civil servants. Yes, I'm going to diminish transfers. Yes, I'm going to take an axe to grants and contributions. But I'm doing that. The reason I'm doing that is that I want to restore our ability to fund the things that matter the most. And that is absent and will remain absent. It's a means and ends argument. And I think it has been absent, certainly from Poilievre's messaging. I think it needs to be more present as they press into the fall in the Liberals' messaging. I don't think Carney has said a lot of that. Final thing I would say is all of this may get trumped by Trump, right? I mean, the reality is, like, as in all things, because he will have permission to change course on all of this if Trump says, I'm sorry, guys, there's only one deal, and the deal is 30% across the board. And increasingly, it's looking to me like Trump is actually just looking for a revenue generator. And so that's what he's sending all these letters to people and going, maybe we'll jerk around between now and August 1st, and it won't be 30 or 35, it'll be 20 or 25. But he wants a number large enough that he can ascribe a substantial amount of revenue to it. And I think increasingly so I worry very much we may not have a deal. And if we don't have on a deal, then we go into kind of a perma fire drill where I think the necessity of these cuts and maybe even the logic of them disintegrates in favor of another agenda.
Jordan, I want to move to the Poilievre interview with Catherine Cullen, but I do have I'm interested in something I want to ask you first, which is, I know it's going to be sorely, sorely tempting, and it may even be mandatory because the public sector unions are probably the biggest piece of infrastructure left standing in the federal NDP. But is it really wise for the NDP to start their comeback by defending what is, I think, generally considered to be a bloated public service?
They should be defending services to Canadians. That's what they should be defending. You don't defend the jobs, you defend what those jobs are delivering. And I think that there's a very clear lane for the NDP here in terms of taking up a space that the Carney government appears to be unaware exists at the top of voters' concerns, which is unemployment, housing affordability, and cost of living. And the main concern I would have if I were a Liberal looking at all of what's coming down here is that the segment of voters who are going to validate what they're doing here is very narrow, because it's exactly as Scott said. On the right and in the business community, there are going to be many who feel that this doesn't go far enough in terms of balancing the books and getting to a result that they would like. On the progressive side, people are going to be opposed to the cuts, and particularly as what is being laid out here does not answer those three questions, which are top of mind for voters. There's been no connection between the project that Carney has outlined here in terms of severe cuts to government spending, massive deregulation, and what are we getting out of that? Do people really view that as the response to the Trump tariff threat? Do they view that as the solution to the affordability crisis, to the housing crisis, to their rising concern about unemployment? There's no connection being made right now to those two things. And so the pocket of validation that's out there, that's available for this government for the tack that they are choosing, is very narrow. And so I would think that that would be worrying. For the NDP, I think that there's a very clear path for them. I mean, look, I don't have any reason to think that they are dumb. They are not going to defend the size of the public service. They are going to defend what it delivers. And I think that there's a lot of space for that.
Can I make two quick points before we move on? And
Sure.
Just one is on what Scott said, and actually I think Brian Topp got into this a little bit on your Chiefs panel. Yeah, I think we're seeing some version of a stealth consumption tax coming in the U.S. by having these across the board tariffs. I do think, and Scott, you just referenced it, the U.S. has a huge revenue problem and they have a huge spending problem. And I don't think they're stupid either, although they do a lot of stupid things. I think in this area, there is some strategy here. And so I think that is something that's going to happen. We're going to have some base level of tariff, I think, hopefully less than what other countries have, and maintain better market access to the US that, on a relative basis. But it appears they're trying to do that, and you can kind of understand why you would be thinking that way if you're them at this moment. It's not politically viable for Congress to pass a consumption tax, but they have a revenue problem that makes our revenue problem look like a walk in the park. And the second thing is, I don't think balancing the budget is ever going to be, or is going to be the test for the Carney government. I think it's not having a fiscal crisis is the test. But I think the much bigger test is, are we going to see some major projects go ahead? And I think he would have a much, much more difficult time with voters if he doesn't accomplish that. But if you
So
see
don't
some
let
major
the fiscal
project,
shit bog down your main project,
right,
which is
exactly,
Yes.
which is the other stuff. So,
yeah.
it's not
Which
about how
they,
many jobs we have in the federal public service. It's how many jobs we have in the federal public service relative to how much economic activity in the private sector is going on. Like we need to start doing shit that is not government. It's that simple, and we need to do it more quickly.
Wait
And
a minute.
so,
But at the same
well,
time, we're going to divert public money into for-profit private resource development. So,
yeah,
let's square that circle.
well, I
I
think you
think you
can.
take
I
that
think you
trade-off
can. I
politically.
think. I think. Like, if we're talking about the politics, I think that trade-off is fairly easy. And I think, well, what's one of our main sponsors on this podcast, CN. Like all of these, there's so many examples of projects like this that started with government basically being in charge and then have been spun off into the private sector. And I think if you're looking at things like pipelines, I think that's probably the only way you can build them, and B, the long term don't belong with the government. But I think to get built, there has to be a significant government role, or you're not going to be able to get them done. And
But we
at
have
the
the
end,
test
end of
case
the
already.
well, we have one test case, but
And
I would
this is
say
the-
we
this
have
is
many,
the-
many more test cases, like essentially every other pipeline, essentially the railways, essentially every airport in this country, on and on and on, the ports, and on and on. So, I think you can sell an airport. I don't think a private company can build an airport, like not like Pearson. I think you can sell a pipeline. I don't think, absent some government involvement, and realistically, you can build one. You can sell it afterwards, absolutely. But I think it's show me the example of this working well.
So let's move into our clipping, because that's an interesting segue, because that actually, I think in discussion of this clipping, we're going to talk a lot about the similarities or the trouble that Poilievre is having distinguishing himself from Carney. But one area in which he could, but didn't in the interview, I thought was that you just made, which is that I've never heard the Conservatives say that they would put public money behind these projects. I've always heard the Conservatives say that the Trudeau government put in place things that made these projects impossible, and that if you removed those impediments, the private sector would step up and build these things. And I don't think that's true. And I think it requires a level of involvement of government that maybe the Poilievre Conservatives would have been uncomfortable with. But let's move to the interview. Scott, Pierre Poilievre did a CBC interview, notable in and of itself. Did an interview with the CBC, did a relatively long-form interview with Catherine Cullen. And I thought that she did a great job of managing that first time situation and being great. But Poilievre, two things I thought were notable out of it, and riff off these two things. The first thing was, as Kory was saying, really struggling to find a message different from the government's. Really struggling to find something to say other than it should be more transparent, or we should be involved in it to make it better. And the second thing was the assertion that he lost his riding because he was honest with people about the cuts he was going to make to the public service, as opposed to Carney, who hid the cuts he was going to make to the public service. And I'm just going to say off the top, maybe I'm wrong. I don't have definitive public data on this. I don't think the Poilievre Conservatives understand how the trucker convoy thing resonated in the city of Ottawa. I think they fucking missed that. And I think it was a huge part of his defeat. I think it made making him lose a project for the city of Ottawa, his approach to that convoy. But they don't seem to see it that way. Scott, go.
I agree with that last point strongly, strenuously, and it's totally anecdotal, and I have an obvious bias, but I think you're exactly right. And maybe they know it, but they can't confess it to themselves, and they certainly can't confess it publicly on CBC. That would probably be a strange way to release that thought to the public. But
okay, they're going to wait for the tough interviewing of the Hub to get that out.
No, they're gonna, yeah. But on it just invites such ridicule. Look, if I have one fault, it may be that I'm too honest. Where do I fall down? I'm too good at screwing. I don't know. Like, it's caused me trouble my whole life, right? Okay, all right, great. Sorry, Jordan. Fuck, I did it again.
No, actually, not quite.
It
Not
wasn't
quite.
about fellatio. So
Okay,
Scott,
well, see, I'm showing signs.
You're diversifying. You're diversifying.
It's a bit of progress. It's relative progress.
All the way to home plate.
Yeah, no, my filthy degenerate corner here. So I mean, it's farcical. It is. I think it's manifestly incorrect. It's farcical. I think it's the kind of thing that, when you say it just causes people to roll their eyes and turn the dial. So, whatever. But it is indicative. By the way, I think there's some deep psychological caverns there also, right? I mean, when you ask him, why did you lose your riding? You were inviting that person to look inside themselves. And that's not, I'm sure he's had some time this early summer doing that. And I don't think that's a place he wants to bring people to. Why did you lose your riding? What's fundamentally wrong with you? What disrupted the connection between you and your own constituents? The people who know you best want you least. Why is that? I mean, right? So I think its answer in some respects can be forgiven because he was probably struggling. But the broader issue is exactly right. I mean, they're in a holding pattern right now. I think where they have arrived is we didn't do anything wrong, and we're not going to do anything different. And they're going to kind of, pussyfoot around that. But that's fundamentally where they are. And I don't think that's a tactical play to get through the leadership review. I think that is a committed perspective on their part. And as a consequence, they are going to say, we, don't necessarily disagree with some of these priorities, but we don't like the way in which they're being carried out, in the hope that on execution and on results, the government will fail. And then they'll be there to pick up the mess. And you always have to keep in mind this fundamental test, though. People have to trust you more to do the same thing. Even if you say, I'm going to do that thing, people have to say, and I want you, not your party, not parliament, right? Not your party banner. I want you, specifically Pierre Poilievre, to do it instead. And that is the thing that I think they most fundamentally struggle with. And I don't think that they have an answer for. And I don't know if they'll come up with one.
Kory, I don't know whether Scott's right about it being unrelated to the leadership review type of thing, because it feels to me like Poilievre and the people around him who ran that campaign, if they were to admit the mistakes of that campaign or the flaws of that campaign, would be immediately bringing into question whether they were the right people to do it again.
Yeah, I think that's probably psychologically what's going on. That said, I wasn't at this event where he spoke at Stampede, but I watched it, and I spoke to a lot of people who were there, and spoke to a lot of other people while I was at Stampede, and I was actually pretty surprised at how poorly that message is going down for them with conservatives who were out there, and I would say similarly to folks here in Toronto and the eastern half of the country. But I think it's not the amount of self-reflection that I think the party is looking for. I think there are some obvious things. And look, the convoy stuff, worked for us some places, and it really didn't work for us in Ottawa. I think that's just a statement of fact. I don't think it's highly controversial. I don't think it calls into question every decision they made on everything, but there's an obvious political trade-off there. And he was a casualty of it. I think, his thinking or their thinking was probably, yeah, that might be generally true, but this is a riding he's held for a long time, and we'll push through it, and he's the leader, and people want to have the leader, represent them, etc. And I think they thought they were going to whistle past it, and they didn't. Instead, they got run over by it. But what's wrong with that admission? It shows it's something that's fairly obvious and shows that you're turned on and you're actually doing some introspection, and that you're able to admit that brown stain on your shirt isn't coffee, it's actually bullshit. And they just haven't they haven't been able to do it.
Who makes that admission?
I don't know.
You're losing me.
Well, I'm trying
I don't
to
go, hey, I'm covered in shit. I want you to know that so you'll think better of me.
I'm trying to keep it all in a cowboy
It's Stampede themed. It's I was gonna say,
it's Stampede themed. It's all over my fake sheriff badge. I don't know. Anyway, but like it's I think it's a fairly mild thing to reflect on and admit in the context of an interview like that. But I think there's a bigger problem that the Conservatives are facing and that he's facing, and this is going into the campaign they had this sort of Superman narrative of there's only one guy in this party and he's got a cape and a giant P on his chest, he's Super Pierre, and this isn't the Avengers, this isn't the Justice League, this is the Superman movie. And he's got a little dog called Andrew Scheer, and that's it. There are no other characters in this. But we're in a context where the guy he's running against has a big resume. He is, viewed as more qualified for the big job. And there's nothing Pierre is going to do to fix his resume. Like he can't go back and, go to Oxford or get a job, running a company somewhere or something like that. That ship has sailed. But what he can do is he can recruit some other people to be a part of a leadership team and say, it's not just Superman. Actually, it is the Justice League. And we've got all these other superheroes who are with us. And, and it's us versus Mark Carney, my team of heroes versus this one guy, and my team can do better, and I have a team, and I can work with other people, and I think that's
a hell of a lot easier to do when he was ahead by 25 points.
It would be, but it's never too late to do the right thing.
It's pretty hard to convince people to buy the Justice League when they think Superman is stinky.
Yeah, well, sure. Look, it's not like there's an easy road here for Poilievre. I think, but there are things that he can do to demonstrate that, he's learned and that they're going to do things somewhat differently. But we did everything right. We were just unlucky tour, and narrative is I don't think it's landing well, right? It's not going to be a shock to any of our listeners or viewers that I'm skeptical on that narrative. But I think the skepticism has spread a lot further and a lot deeper in the party. And I'm not saying that he's going to have a problem in his, in the leadership vote in January. I think he'll sail through that, fairly easily. But I don't think he's going to get 83% in that by-election, and I think that's going to be a problem for him. And I think
why? Just out of interest sake, why? If he gets 73%, does anyone care 2 days later?
Well, some people will care. I think they will care. I think he will care. He's not the kind of guy who.
Do you know anything about this candidate?
Only what everyone else has read.
No.
I nothing personally. But the idea that you're going to hit that same number, I think it's challenging. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. I guess we'll see. I think it's an uphill battle. But he can do things like try to recruit some other people. He can do some things like increase the profile of some of the people in that caucus who are quite capable, and if given the authority to go out and speak more on behalf of the party and play bigger roles and things, could easily do so. It's not like they don't have anyone there who could play that role. Those people exist. So I don't know. Let's see what they do. But I think he would be better served to do that. I agree with you, Scott, that that's not the most compelling message in the world. But I would hope you would agree that that's better than what they're doing now. If it's just Pierre versus Carney, I don't think you get a different answer at the end of that. In fact, all the polling would indicate that it's a worse answer today than it was on election day.
The gap between the two of them. Something you disagree with them about? that puts you on the right side of public opinion and go hard on that?
If it's just him alone, the ultimate contrast is who do you like better, Pierre or Carney? And like there's like a 30-point gap on that right now. Like he is a ballot drag for the Conservatives. I think there's lots of room to go after Carney on some things. I think they're more challenging, as we've discussed, for Conservatives than they are for Jordan and her team. But like there are things, and but I think ultimately the biggest thing that he lost on is I don't trust you to do this job. You're both saying you're going to do basically the same thing, and I like the other guy more than I like you.
Well, and the problem is, one of the problems that he has, and this interview absolutely exemplified, is that he treats his loss like it was an act of God. Like it was wholly external. Like it was nothing pertaining to him, to his campaign, to what they put forward, to the convoy, for example. And I live in downtown Ottawa. I lived through the convoy. This man brought fucking donuts to people who illegally held our city hostage for a month. Like, it's not rocket science. People didn't like that. And I think that the lack of any acknowledgement that the trade-off that the Conservatives tried to make in courting that MAGA rage baiting type of populism and how that might have played out for them is harming him now, because you're absolutely right. There is very little daylight between what we're seeing from Carney in terms of the cost-cutting agenda and all of those things. And there's nobody who trusts that Poilievre would do it better, because he has absolutely cut off any idea of a team that would be people other than him that voters might actually use to sort of buffer their dislike of him on a personal level. And then I also just want to say, and I think we all talked about this off camera, like, what a fucking miserable interview. He sounds really unhappy. He is not capable, really, I think, of turning the corner on this, maybe for some personal reasons that he has not really come to terms with this loss. Like, this is not a man.
Didn't he look like he wanted somebody to hand him an apple, Jordan?
He was miserable. And it's not,
Beauty this time.
It's, I don't know. No, Snow White, but like, this is not a guy who has sat with the loss and drawn lessons from it. This is a guy who's just trying to push past it. And those are really different things. And I agree that he's going to sail through the review, but I think that might be a worse situation if he sails through without actually fixing any of these things.
Is there a risk that we are all just creatures of the moment, though? And it's like, of course, this is going to be a searing and brutal time for him. Of course, his first few interviews in the middle of the summer after that devastating loss, which removed from him what looked like a certain conclusion of his lifelong ambition. Of course, it's going to be a fucking awful time. Like, what kind of person wouldn't be suffering in that situation? But the government has got a lot on its plate. There are massive challenges externally and internally. Like, I'm not trying to make the case for him, like, as I'm not for him, but I'm just saying, like, I can understand, like, if he wasn't going to be slogging through the summer, what would you expect? So, like, on the narrow point, I just want to say this, on the narrow point of the convoy stuff and how much MAGA, and separating himself from that, I do think, by the way, that highlights a dilemma. I think that constituency has become an integrated part of its voter coalition that they cannot afford to alienate. And it is an obstacle to acceptance with a certain percentage of the population. I know they'll say they got
they completely collapsed the PPC vote in the election. They completely destroyed.
But it provides a ceiling. It provides a ceiling.
But so did Doug Ford. Like, I think that was going to happen anyway. I agree that that's part of the problem here, and probably why I wouldn't give an answer on the convoy stuff. That's obvious. But I don't think it's about collapsing the PPC vote, because so many other politicians who didn't go that route were able to do the same. So, like, but here's the difference.
He might also believe it.
They raised, like,
he might be with them.
Like they raised like $50 million, largely from folks who are giving small donations, who love all that crazy shit. And so, like, that's the dilemma, I think.
But it was also, I should say, like, core to their social. It was core to their social media strategy as well. Like, that whole ecosystem.
So both, but it's also self-limiting, because it's also why they're getting their ass handed to them.
Are they also the same people that were in the crowds? at the
Yeah,
rally.
well,
Yeah.
but as we've talked about
That's
before,
why I
it's
think
not
it's
like
too
there's a
valuable a
group.
component of their constituency now.
There's not a group of those people in every city. There's maybe a small gathering of them, but they tour around like a revival party, and it's like, where are we going tonight? Oh, well, there's a music festival. I mean, convoy, revival meeting, and enter name of the city, and everyone gets in
Pack
there
up the babies and grab the old ladies. Let everyone know.
And they go to the revival meeting and relive, that time when they were having so much fun in Ottawa.
Measles for everyone.
Right, exactly.
So,
right,
so
yes.
I just, Kory, if I could just interrupt you for a second. The fucking Reid, who a couple of weeks ago was mocking me for the Eagles. Mocking me for
Are we
the
going to
Eagles.
throw this down? Are you
just
kidding?
saying a little Neil Diamond for us.
Neil Diamond was in the Brill Building writing fantastic knockout hits, and you look at his catalog of songs, I would stand that up against the Eagles any fucking day of the week. Song Blue, let's fucking rip it right now. Cancel the rest of this podcast and let's just soundtrack it.
I don't know. David's wearing a Talking Head shirt today, so my money's on him.
All right, so I think we don't have time for the NDP. We have to kick that to next week.
As is ever thus.
We're like Canada.
Yeah, we don't have time for the NDP this week. So, Mr. Pinsent, will you end the show with our Hey Yous?
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
Kory, you got a Hey You?
Sure, and leads nicely into this. Mine's going to be for Poilievre, and on doing that CBC interview, which was maybe not the best interview ever done, but I think the fact that he actually went and did it, I'm sure that caused him to swallow a lot of pride to go and do that. And I think if you're looking at the voters that the Conservatives have had in so many previous elections and lost in this last one, and why that happened, I think one of the reasons is not enough time communicating on legacy media, which is the predominant source that those people go to for information. And I think it's great, all of the new media stuff. I think their social media strategy and all of those things brought them in a lot of new voters. But I think giving the cold shoulder to all the legacy media and allowing only critics to communicate on that, as opposed to getting your own message out unfiltered, was a mistake. And so, hey, Pierre, I think you're doing something smart by swallowing your pride a little bit and doing some of those kinds of interviews. I think it's essential if you want to reach those people.
All right, Jordan.
That was very generous, Kory. I'm going to be mean and persnickety. So my Hey You is going out to the Carney government because I observed this week a press release went out. There was a little EI announcement on Thursday, and I got very excited and opened the press release. And because I thought that, given the rising unemployment numbers, and yes, I know there was a slight uptick last month, but it's still marginal. We are still facing some of the highest unemployment in 8 years outside of COVID. So I thought, given these numbers, here we are. The Liberals are starting to act on their platform commitment to unfuck EI, to make sure it's there for people. And this is great. They're doing it, right when we're seeing this massive escalation from Trump on tariff issues. Like, great timing, great message. But I cracked it open and oh, no, there were 3 tiny piddling little measures of improvement to EI that were done in March, and one of them was supposed to expire. And they're renewing it until the fall, and that was fucking it. And that contrast would be, hilarious if it weren't for the fact that, an appalling 2/3 of Canadians can't qualify for EI. And we are in a time of rising unemployment where the greater tariff threats that we see, the more likely that's going to deepen into a crisis as we go ahead. This is a political problem that is staring them in the face. And there is just a fucking complete disconnect between what the bureaucracy and what the government is actually doing on this and where people are thinking about this, and actually even things that Carney has committed to. So some of the urgency, some of the cutting through the nonsense, some of the bold decision-making that apparently Carney and his team have no problem doing when it comes to slashing government spending and deregulating could be fucking applied to this problem. So that's my Hey You.
Excellent. All right, Scott.
My hate yous to the Carney government, in particular, to Michael Sabia and the incoming chief of staff, Marc-Andre Blanchard. This ethics screen. This is a deal. Okay, guys. The assets that the prime minister has and the number of workarounds that will be required is a serious and significant challenge. David and I know, because we worked with Paul Martin, who had one company. I'm going to tell you right now, a modest corporate tax change that was not directed at the shipping sector in 1996. None of us caught. The deputy didn't catch it. We didn't catch it because it wasn't intended for that sector. It nevertheless got seized upon by the Yvon Loubier and the Bloc Québécois in the House of Commons, and they made meal out of it for years and years and years. He had one entity and he had divested entirely of the company. It still haunted us like a ghost. This blind trust and the need to set up blinds, the need to set up walls to work around these files, it's a full-time goddamn responsibility. It is a treasure chest for the opposition to accuse the government and the prime minister personally of malfeasance. And none of that will be true. It's not like he's trying to use government to enrich himself, but that allegation will be there, and it is going to require these screens that have to be put in place. They will require constant, rigorous examination. You don't just imagine if it's a violation. You have to imagine what is the most malicious characterization that could possibly be invented of the most obscure policy change. And it requires real dedication and time. And you have to make certain that you don't go, I've had a long career in business. I've had a long career in law. This isn't a big deal. You're going to have to really, really, really be attentive. This is future trouble with a flashing red light, and it's going to require a lot of care on the part of the Prime Minister's office and the clerk.
Yeah, that is for damn sure. My hey you goes out to Gregor Robertson, the Minister of Housing in the Carney government. I think I keep saying on any show that I'm on that the cost of living and the cost of housing, as an illustrator of that, remain the top issues of concern for most Canadians. And if the Carney government has a well thought out and well financed policy on the social policy affordability side of the equation, it's in housing. It was a massive part of the government's platform in the election campaign. It seemed to be pretty well thought out. I'm amazed at how quiet the government is about that issue since the election, and I think you have to get less quiet about it, because I think it's going to have to be the shield that you wear on the affordability side as you pursue the build agenda. You're not going to have a lot of stuff defending you on the affordability axis, and this is going to have to be one of them. So progress reports, and action going to be pretty critical. So, Minister, I know you're probably trying to figure it out, but start talking to us about it. Okay, that's our show for this week. I want to thank the three of you for being here. It's fun as always. Our presenting sponsor, TELUS. Our sponsor, CN Rail. What? Three people. That's right.
Remember, it's
there's only three people who matter.
3 people and a host. Kind of like,
and it wrote,
3 stars and a
3 and a David.
Right. Fuck you all. Fuck you all. I'm going to replace you with 3 different people next to you, and this show will be just as successful.
You can just AI generate us at this point.
I think you're at least 1/3 correct.
All right. See you guys later. Thanks very much.